Hi everyone, and welcome back to Dennis Deep Cuts. Today we are going to talk more about books, and my guest today is my good friend Johnny Temple, who you might know from bands like Soulside, Girls Against Boys, and also a band called Fake Names that I sing in. Johnny is also a book publisher, which we will dive into. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Yeah, perfect. So let's start by asking, when did you fall in love with books?
When did I fall in love with books? I think I fell in love with books when I was in college, when I was at university, and I started reading books by African-American authors, and I liked books, but I was never, as a kid, I wasn't a bookworm. I didn't read constantly. I did read books, but I started reading books by writers like Richard Wright. There was a book called Man-Child in the Promised Land by Claude Brown. Started reading Toni Morrison, Alice Walker.
Of course.
And somehow that connected books more to the world around me and to, problems with the world in a way that I could understand. I think that's when I really began to fall in love with books. It wasn't early in life.
I was early. I learned how to read when I was 6, and I could properly read. So when I was 9, I started reading adult literature.
Oh, wow.
I read Lord of the Rings when I was 9.
Oh, wow.
And I loved it. And I was just, when I was young, I was just at the library at all times, just reading, hanging out. Because I fell in love. I guess music and reading was almost at the same time, but there's something about the imagination and that world. I was also a very lonely kid. I just hung out by myself, so I read a lot of books, just getting into that world, and I really just fell in love with it. And then, I wish I'd be reading more, but at these times, people don't read as much as I don't read as much as I used to.
I read a lot more than I used to.
Yeah, but that's also part of your job. So what made you start Akashic Books?
Akashic Books started as a record label.
It did, because I have some of your 7-inches.
Oh, do you?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
What was the earliest stuff you released on 7-inch?
Sevens was a band with Bobby Sullivan, who's the singer of Soulside, and his brother Mark Sullivan. There was a 7-inch that was produced by Ian Mackay. That was, I believe, our first release, and then we did a King Face.
I have that one. I have the King Face 7-inch. Yes, that's the one I have.
And then we released a great record by an LA band called Distortion Felix, which I should got to give you a copy of it. It's a great record, it's partly because that record was so great that I became a book publisher, because I started the company with Bobby Sullivan and Mark Sullivan, two brothers, fellow DC musicians, and they dropped out of the company early on, but they were my co-founders, and I just got to give them their due in that. But I had always wanted, I never wanted to be a book publisher, but I did always want to be to run a record label. And in 1995 or 1996, Girls Against Boys we were in the right place at the right time, and we signed a lucrative record deal with Geffen Records, and we got paid way too much money. And for the first time in my life, though I had a perfectly comfortable upbringing, I never ever had extra money. Yeah. And so for the first time in my life, I had extra money, and so we started this. And I also, moving to a big record label, I wanted to make sure that I stayed grounded in independent culture, which is where my heart was and is and will always be. And so started the record label. But at that time, in the mid-90s, there were so many record labels, so many good record labels, that there was not really a need for another record label. And even though at that time Girls Against Boys was pretty popular and we got lots of media attention, and even having that advantage of being in a popular band, I started putting out records, but it became very clear that there was not a need for The world didn't need another record label.
Another indie record label.
And we put out this great record by this band, Distortion Felix, and we're just not able to get it. We couldn't get it the attention it deserved, in part because there was all these better record labels that already existed. And then it was just on a whim that we published a book just to sort of try that out.
Yeah.
And all of this, the records and the books, it was all a hobby because I was still playing Girls Against Boys, touring half the year,
your main gig,
recording, all that stuff. So it was all a hobby. But as soon as we published the first book, which was a novel by a fantastic novel called The Fuck Up by a New York writer named Arthur Nersessian, and we published it, people loved it, the bookstores reordered it, and it was everything I'd ever wanted out of the record label, because at that time there were not a million book publishers. There was like 6.
Yeah.
You know, and so there was a real need for it. So I sort of stumbled backwards. It was not my intention, but sort of stumbled into this thing. And then as it turned out, I really loved doing it and just kept doing it as a hobby. From 1997 is when we published The Fuck Up. That was the first book. And around 2000, as the music industry was collapsing in on itself, and I had been, you know, in a full-time rock and roll band for nearly a decade, and like yourself and like a lot of people, there was only so, I don't know, I didn't feel that being I shouldn't have said like yourself, but because I don't mean to be presumptuous, but the reason why I said that is I know you have broad interests, and I have broad interests, and interests also in politics and social justice, and maybe unlike you as a singer and the music you've made, in Girls Against Boys, we weren't like an explicitly political band. Soulside was, but Girls Against Boys, we all were committed to, you know, progressive politics, but the band itself was not a vehicle for political expression. And that was really important to me at the time. And after doing it for a decade, it was, I felt like there was a lot of my personality and my interests that I was not able to express through just being like a full-time rock and roll bass player.
Rock and roller. So you had the publishing company for 3 years until you were like, this is what I'm going to do full time?
Maybe 4 or 5 years, yeah.
But how many books do you think you released during that period?
Maybe 6, maybe about 8.
All right,
8
so
books.
like 1 or 2 books a year.
Yes, 1 or 2 books a year.
Like, and then once the rock and roll died down, you went into full.
I went from.
Also, the first couple of years, were you the only one working at
Akashic?
At Akashic, or did you have people? I mean, people helping you out, or?
Like Bobby and Mark were there probably until like 98 or 99.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure about the exact chronology, but it was basically, once they were gone, it was me, although Johanna Ingalls, who still works at Akashic, she was working for Gold Mountain, which was the management company that managed Girls Against Boys, in addition to Nirvana, Beastie Boys.
That's a good, top shelf management.
And Johanna. So Johanna was basically an assistant to our manager, but she was a real book lover, and she started kind of helping me out on the side, and basically volunteering to help out. And then around 2000 or 2001, I was able to start paying her, and I pulled her out of the music business, and I have employed her ever since. So it was never, I don't think I was ever truly alone in the endeavor, but there, it was sort of like Johanna and me and maybe an intern for a few years, and then slowly built up, a small staff.
Did you get an office early on, or was it a lot from doing it at home?
It was out of the apartment. I don't know when we first, it would have been around 2003 when we finally got like a dedicated office. Although we did have, I went from running it out of my bedroom to having like a dedicated room in my house, and then eventually
the book room,
and then eventually it was important to move it out of the house to just create a little bit of separation between my. I'm not very good at separating my personal life from my music or my books, but well, better than I was back then.
Well, I mean, it helps when you're not working from home all the time, because I can feel that as a musician. When I'm home, I work at home, and then it's quite easily, you can easily get distracted, and you're like, oh, maybe I should just, I'll do the laundry now, because you're bored of whatever you're doing. So I get it's good to like separate that.
I actually had the opposite problem. It was that the work, because I'm a workaholic, would intrude on my personal life.
So your house was in ruins.
I needed to protect I needed to carve out space so that I could have like a personal life. And
I can attest to the fact that we've been, whenever we're recording or playing, or whenever we're not actually on stage, John is on his computer or on the phone with Chuck D, just stuff like that. So when did you, because I mean, you have a lot of focus on African American authors in general. When did you start? Because I mean, I guess it's like with everything, like you need to find a way into that world, and then when did that start? Was that early on, or was it?
Yeah, it was early on. I mean, my taste in art has always been dominated by artists from the African diaspora, African American artists. As a music listener, reggae is one of my great passions, and so pretty much from the get-go. Actually maybe we didn't publish a Black author until our 8th book. But
still pretty early on.
But early on, and then pretty quickly that became a cornerstone of what we do, and it has a little bit to do with the struggle against racism and for social justice, but I actually think it has just a lot to do with just taste. And for me, like as a publisher, you're trying to publish the very best books you can get your hands on, and it just happens that a lot of the best books I can get, the books that I'm drawn to, are by Black authors. But that's only part of the list. It's not like our list isn't 75% Black authors, but it's always been a strong part of our list, and something we've been really recognized for, and something I'm extremely proud of.
What do you think, because I mean, when we talk about this, a lot of what you're doing as a publishing company feels kind of similar to doing a record label, but not really. What do you think the biggest difference is from having a publishing company or you only did a record label for a short period of time, but I mean, you've been on plenty of record labels, you work with plenty of record labels. What do you think the biggest difference is?
Well, one difference is that writing is such a solitary pursuit, and that's one thing that I really notice, that music is so often a collaborative effort. Even if there's like a single singer-songwriter, they're still going to assemble usually
producers and engineers.
Or they assemble a band. Even if they're even if they're writing the songs or whatever. There's a lot of collaboration, but writers, it's such a solitary thing that that's one of the key differences. That a lot of differences stem from that, and I noticed it's interesting because for me, books were an escape away from the music business, which and the social hierarchies in the music world, but I still found a lot of things. Publishing books made me appreciate a lot of things about music that I didn't necessarily appreciate before. One of the things I noticed early in publishing is you want your authors to get out there and get on the road. In music,
that's kind of our main objective.
Our main objective, and we do that. Like we don't necessarily wait for a record label to tell us to go on the road. We do it on our own time, and we do it independently, and ideally you're working hand in hand with a label, but you're not working for the record label, you're working for yourselves.
Yes.
And that's something that I think is like, I feel bad for authors that they don't have that. For one thing, authors don't generally get paid for speaking engagements. Some do, and in the poetry world, sometimes poets can be performers. On the other hand, it's really hard to sell poetry books. But authors, I think, a lot tend to, you know, there's many that don't fit this, and it's changed a lot since 1997 when I started publishing books, but it felt like authors were kind of waiting around for their publisher to make them succeed, rather than really understanding themselves as completely independent entities. And there's a lot of factors at play there, but the fact, you know, the way that authors wouldn't just take their show on the road independently shapes the business, and I don't mean to be blaming authors. I have great
no, I get that
passion,
but I mean, it's a big difference from the music industry where, I mean, we love, well, most of us love to tour, and that's a great way of getting music out there. And I guess it is. I mean, it's interesting because in Sweden, if authors travel and talk about the books, they get paid because we live in Sweden, you know. But no, so I get that, and it's, as you said, it's a solitary thing. Like, you do it on your own. If you're lucky, you might have someone from the publishing house with you, but you should kind of travel by yourselves. And you know, we've all seen like some authors sitting there, and there's 3 people listening to like him reading it. And, you know, you sell 2 books, and maybe it's not even worth it, you know. But so I get that. What do you think? Like, what's the most like exciting book you've been a part of? Can you even answer that?
I can. Yeah. The question I can't answer is what's my favorite book that I've published, because I've published 400 books, and
that's a lot of books.
I'm not gonna, you know, but I can't name a favorite, even if I could, I wouldn't. But one of my favorite projects was, for a bunch of reasons, was publishing the debut novel, which I think you've read, John Crow's Devil, by the great Jamaican writer Marlon James.
I've loved that book. I told you many times, I loved that book. I thought it was marvelous.
Yeah, and basically, I got myself invited to a literary conference in Jamaica in 2004, I think it was, 2003 or 2004, and strictly through my own interests and perseverance and a really, really wonderful coincidence of meeting one of Jamaica's great writers, a writer named Colin Channer, who we met. I had set up a booth at this place, the National Black Writers Conference, which was this writers conference that in those days happened every 2 years. And I was just sitting there at a table, and I'd only published maybe 12 or 13 books. And one of them was this book by a Cuban author, a Uruguayan author living in Cuba named Daniel Chavarria, a book called Adios Muchachos. And it had just gotten a great New York Times review. And this man comes up to the booth and says, "Oh, that book's incredible. Are you the publisher?" And I said, "Yeah." And we got into this spirited conversation. And then one thing led to another. We're talking, and we realized we live right across the street from each other. And we became fast friends. And then he invited me he said, "I run this literary festival in Jamaica called Calabash." And then he invited me to, not to the festival, but to this publishing seminar in Kingston, Jamaica, for aspiring writers in Jamaica. And they held these sort of weekly seminars, and they were inviting people from around the world, writers and editors, to talk to the Jamaican writers. And so one of my writers, or a writer who I did a lot of great work with, named Kaylee Jones, she went down there to Kingston a week before me, and while she was there, she called me up and said, "I just met this really, really, really talented writer named Marlon James. When you come here next week, you got to meet him." And so I went down to Kingston. I was on a publishing panel talking about, you know, business of publishing. And after the panel, this young man walks up to me and says, "Hi, my name is Marlon James." And I said, "Oh, yeah, Kaylee told me about you. I'm really excited to read your manuscript." And he said, "Are you really in Girls Against Boys?" And I swear there was probably one person in Jamaica that knew who Girls Against Boys was, and it was Marlon James.
That is so awesome.
And at the time, he was despondent as a writer. He had sent his manuscript to 70 agents and editors in New York and the US and had received 70 rejections.
What?
And he had...
On that book?
On that book. And he deleted, out of frustration, he deleted the book and said, "I'm not going to be a writer. Clearly I'm not good at it. I'm just going to do graphic design or pursue some of my other interests." Then he met Kaylee. He met me. I read the manuscript. I get goosebumps just even thinking about it. I read it. I mean, I literally have goosebumps right now. And I immediately knew this is all I've ever wanted to do as a book publisher, is publish this book. And we published it in 2004. Then his next book was published by a bigger publishing house, but he sort of started to get more and more popular. And then maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he won the Booker Prize, which is one of the biggest literary awards in the world. And now he's one of the most prestigious writers in the world.
And you gave him, you were the indie label that got him started.
Yeah, and when he won the Booker Prize, he didn't win it with a book I published, but when he won it, in when he received the award, he's like sitting there, like speaking to British royalty. This was in England, and he thanked Kaylee and me for, you know, putting him on the map. And it was very mutual, and he put me on the map, and now he's a very close friend, and it's one of my favorite stories also, because in publishing, which is a very bourgeois business in America, very upper middle class and upper class, very white, the way people discover books is you get an email from a literary agent that says, "Hey, Joe, I think this sounds right up your alley." And then Joe reads it and says, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll pay $50,000 for that. I discovered that."
Yeah.
Whereas for me, it's like the idea of discovery. I like the idea. I got myself down to Kingston,
you met
Jamaica,
the guy,
and created. I had to create a situation in which I was able to meet Marlon James, and to me, that felt like a real discovery. And that's still it's like my favorite. I have other I've had a bunch of incredible experiences, but that's...
No, I get that. It's like almost a groundbreaking experience, because it's like, for him, I mean, imagine if you said, "Yeah, I'm not interested," maybe none of his books would be published.
Yeah, I mean, if he hadn't have met Kaylee the week before he met me,
he might have been like, done.
He'd be in Jamaica doing something else, and he would be much less satisfied with his life.
And the world will miss out on fantastic
the world would be not as... Well, the world's not a great place, but it'd be a little bit shittier.
A little bit. That's fantastic. So that brings me into one thing that I want to talk a little bit about, is the fact that I read a lot when I tour and I read at home, but one thing that I've found myself reading a lot is rock biographies, just because if they're well written, it's an easy read, you can learn some stuff, you can get excited about music. What do you think about musicians as authors? Without throwing anyone under the bus or anything,
I think musicians make great authors. I mean, they can make great authors.
Yeah, of course.
And it's funny, in the early days of publishing, I was able to get a lot of media attention for Akashic because I was in a rock band.
Yeah.
And a question that I was often asked, and I still get asked this, people will say, "Oh, you're a rock dude and you're publishing books. Does anyone else in your band read?" And to me, it's like the most ignorant question in the world.
That's horrible. What?
It's such an ignorant question, because musicians, whether you're a rock musician, a classical musician, a jazz musician, a hip hop musician, a reggae musician, all those musicians read more than most people do.
Yes.
So this idea that, like, does anyone else in your band read, is really is like, wow, you don't understand art, do you? You know,
no,
because all the arts intermingle,
yeah,
and great artists of any medium are absorbing art. You know, there's probably no really great artist that isn't inspired by different art forms.
Yeah,
you know, it's not like musicians just are inspired by music. Musicians are inspired by paintings and statues.
Yes, and I think maybe I totally agree, because I think as a musician, or as, you know, someone that works with these things, I'm always connected, and whenever I read something, whenever I watch a movie, that's like fodder for, you know, creativity.
Absolutely.
I do think one of the problems, and that's kind of a different conversation, but I think that books are art, and for a lot of people music is entertainment. And I think that might be like the crux of that conversation, because it's like, oh, you're into entertainment, but I think that music is art, and I think what we're doing with music is art. And then so much of music and so much of the way we express ourselves is through words, with the lyrics and everything that we do. And I think that if you're really into that idea, I mean, a lot of my language, how I write lyrics, is from books, literature, because of, like, that's how you can see certain flow, you can see certain words, and you see like how people express themselves. So I think that for me it's been incredibly important. Like most of my books have, like, you know, they're dog-eared, and I have lines, and I photocopy them, like shit. That now when I have the phone, like I'll take a full paragraph. I'm like, I need to save this, because it can give me something that I can, you know, that I can write about. And I think that's fantastic. But yeah, it's a bit ignorant, and it's when people say,
I mean, to me, it's the same ignorance that would call musicians entertainers, rather
than
artists,
totally, no, it's
because the music is obviously art.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, it can be entertainment.
And we're rock musicians, so we are also entertainers. I don't mean to suggest we're not entertainers.
No, of course,
but the art and the artistry is the biggest part of what we do.
Yeah. But maybe it's like, because that's like how, because I mean, then you have books like Dan Brown, which is literature, but it's also kind of entertainment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it's not. I mean, I'm not throwing him under the bus. Well, I kind of am, because I try to read his books, and I couldn't read it because the language was so poor. Mm-hmm. I mean, I get the story; it's an exciting story, but just the language. Because I'm a bit of a language nerd. I like when stuff is written. You can tell that this person has a very specific voice, and then that Brown book is just like, it's just words that, you know what I mean. There's no aesthetics to it. That's what I'm trying to say.
I mean, I would respectfully disagree with you about that. I haven't read Dan Brown, so I can't actually disagree with you about Dan Brown, but. There's in the literary world, in the book world, there's a divide between literary authors and then what's called genre authors, mystery, thrillers.
Your Stephen King's, or your Dan Browns,
or the Dan Browns. Yeah. And for me, I don't really see those differences. I do understand. You know, you say you're like a language nerd, and I understand that there are a lot of books that are more, you know, about the aesthetics and the language, and then you have writers like Dan Brown, maybe, where it's more about the storytelling. But to me, when I read a great mystery book, or Stephen King is, to me, Stephen King is an incredible artist, but there's some people that think of him as just being a commercial author. Yeah. But when I read a Stephen King book, I totally lose sight of the fact that I'm reading. I'm just immersed in the story. And if someone, even through simple, plain language, can pull me into a story where I am just in that story, to me, that's magical.
Yeah. No, I have to agree with that, because we talked about this the other day, because I was like, I read Stephen King when I was 15. I'm like, I'm done, you know, I'm grown up now. I'm reading Jean Genet. Fucking... But then on tour a couple of years back, I bought a Stephen King, The Outsider, or whatever it's called, and I was like, every night everyone's like looking at their computers. I'm like reading. I'm like, this is so exciting. So I mean, I get that, but it's like a different, you know, how you approach. I mean, it's the same thing with music. sometimes you want to put on music and just have it flow in the background. Sometimes you want to dive into music and be like challenged by it, or you want to feel it. So it's, I guess it's, I mean, it's the same thing with any type of art, I would assume.
Yeah, and there's probably classical musicians and jazz musicians who would look at the music we make,
yes,
and think that it was shallow or simple.
Yes,
and I would,
which it is.
And I would,
no.
it isn't.
No,
it absolutely isn't. You know, but at the same time, you know, we're not reading. We're not. Our music isn't. You know, written in sheet music.
No,
and
it's definitely not.
And
do you think anyone in our band can actually write sheet music? It comes down to.
I always thought Brian could, and then I think he can't.
No, I don't think he can.
Yeah,
he's a great musician, but I don't think. He can
probably no one. Could Michael Hampton? Nah,
no,
he probably
maybe
can't.
Brendan could read drum notes because it's slightly different. To
I don't know, his little notes that he writes himself look like chicken scratch
like gibberish. That's gibberish. But let's go back to, because there's like this influx of every musician that have put out a record needs to now write a book, which is, I mean, I guess it's fine. We need to find alternative revenue streams, I guess. But then again, to write a book's not going to make you rich if you're not Dan Brown or Stephen King.
Yeah. Well, people don't know this. People think in the book. It's funny. It's one of the things I learned in book publishing is that we in the book business. I don't really do this myself, but the book business pretends that it's bigger than it is.
Yes.
It pretends that it's. You know, there's film, television, music, books. But books is actually a much smaller. It's just like, you know, and dance is even smaller than books.
Yeah.
And there's, you know, there's the different levels. But books, most books really only sell a couple thousand copies.
Yeah.
And there's a handful of writers who make a living off their book sales, but very, very, very few. But yeah, some people, musicians and other people, think that it's gonna be some you know, new part of their, you know, something them keeping them financially prosperous. But books generally don't play that role.
No, I think just in general getting into the arts and thinking like, now I'm gonna become a rich person. It's just like it's a dumb idea.
Yeah, I mean I frequently talk to people who, you know, or organizations that, you know, hey Johnny, can I pick your brain? And they want to use books as a way to help fund their organization. And I'm just saying that book is going to drain the money out of your organization. And I mean, I make a living selling books, and I have a staff, and I pay them, and I buy them health insurance, you know. So it's like of course we do make money, but it also helps that we've had a few hits along the way. But yeah, books, you know, books can be a little bit cheapened if every celebrity just kind of cranks out a book, and often they're not even writing the book.
No,
you know?
Because that's something we also talked about, that a lot of, which coming back to like, I love language, or you know, like aesthetics.
Yeah.
And then you read a book and you're like, this is just an interview with someone talking, and they kind of edit it so it kind of feels like a book, but you can hear that someone's saying, well, then we did this and then we did that, and I'm like, that's not very exciting. I love when the person that writes the book has a specific language. It doesn't have to be, you know, super intellectual advanced, just have to be their own language. And I think that's something with the interview, I mean, I guess it is their own language, but it doesn't make for exciting reading. And
I would say that they either need to have their language or have some sense of what they want to do with that language, or I think they need to have a story that they are burning to tell.
Yeah, true.
And I think that you can get away with, even if you're not a very good writer and you don't write beautiful sentences, and you maybe don't have a very sophisticated craft for writing sentences. But if there's like a story inside you that really needs to get out, then I think that can also make for a good book.
Of course. So you released and you worked with. You haven't released that many rock biographies, have you?
Very few, if any.
If any, I can't think but you
published a lot of books with musicians.
Exactly, with musicians, and you published a lot of books about music. I'm thinking about you, Peaches.
Yeah, most of the music books that I publish are by musicians. Yeah. I'm not like, I have no interest. I do not like and this isn't a judgment. It's just a personal taste.
Personal taste.
I'm not interested in music criticism, and I'm not interested in literary criticism. Those are obviously important and play an important role in culture, but I'm not so interested in that. So in fact, almost all the music books I publish are written by musicians,
and a lot of it
rather than about musicians.
Photo books also.
Photo books. Yeah. A lot of them are sort of art books, and because actually a lot of the time, if you're a popular musician, if you want to write a tell-all memoir that's like has all the juicy gossip that the public wants to know, you're going to sell that book to Simon and Schuster or HarperCollins. The books that come to me is like when Chuck D from Public Enemy has his drawings or his art that isn't like immediately commercial and isn't telling some story about the beef he had with this rapper or that rapper. It's more esoteric and really like a little more artsy in a way. We did we published a wonderful book by the guitarist Mark Ribot, great guitar player. That's a mix of his essays, some of which is about advocacy for musicians, but it's also mixed in with his fiction. We did a book with Chris Novoselic from Nirvana that was about some of his ideas for how to fix American democracy. But again, it's like what the big publishers want is from Chris Novoselic would be a book about his relationship with Kurt Cobain. But Chris Novoselic, that wasn't the book that he was going to write. No.
At that point.
At that point, he may still do that, but that wasn't what he wanted to do then. He was passionate about politics and the what's wrong with the electoral system. As we know, there's a lot that's wrong with the electoral system.
Well, that's fantastic. So we're gonna try to close this off, but we could talk about books all night. We do talk about books quite a lot when we tour together or play shows together. We touched upon this, but it seems from all the stories you're telling me that a lot of authors are a bit jealous of us musicians. It seems or that impressed, way. Maybe, I don't know. Like there's something.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that thing of authors being the solitary pursuit, and as you're an author, of course, you want millions of people to buy your book, and I, as the publisher, want millions of people to buy the books I publish. Definitely, I'm not trying to be obscure, and sometimes people mistake whether it's music or books for those of us like you and me who make outsider art. But we still want to sell millions of copies.
Yes, we do.
but that's not going to be what's driving us. We're gonna make what we make or what we're good at making, and then you still hope that millions of people are gonna like it. And so, but I think that there's that glamour of being a rock and roll musician with like the big audience, the adoring, and also audiences for popular music and rock and roll music and punk rock music, super expressive audiences.
Yes,
punk rock. It's like we were just 2 nights ago we were playing in DC and there was a pit.
It was pretty wild.
Some people don't like slam dancing, but I of course know neither you nor I like it when it's overly macho or overly violent. But I like it when music moves people to start flailing their body around.
It's pretty amazing. And I guess if you are an author, yes, you can go out and maybe read and you meet people like last night we went to a really awesome book launch, and you could meet your fans. But for musicians it's quite direct. You'll see how people react, and as an author, people sit at home and they read their books. No one's pogoing to their new book.
Although two things. One is that I may not be pogoing to the book that I'm reading now. But it is moving me like in a way that music does. I'm reading this book right now, Lone Women by Victor LaValle, a New York-based writer. And it's a short book, and I've just been reading it on this tour that we're on, and I will finish it tomorrow morning. But I'm literally gasping and talking to myself. It's just physically really moving me. Yeah. And books, it's tricky because music goes into your body. Yeah. All your orifices and your pores, music comes at you, and there's no filters. I mean, there can be filters, and some music is more cerebral than others, but a lot of music just like goes into you, and then your body tells you how you feel about it. And that's one advantage that, and I think that's one of the reasons why maybe some writers are jealous of musicians, and also why music is more generally popular, is that books have to be filtered through your eyes and through your brain. And but I love that feeling, like I was talking about reading a Stephen King novel, or in this case this Victor LaValle novel, where it's hitting me so viscerally. And I mean, I was just telling my 17-year-old kid about it, and he doesn't even read that many books, but I'm like, Arthur, you got to read this book, because I just feel like it's the kind of book that would show him what is so amazing about literature. And I would urge everybody to read this book that I'm reading, because it's utterly remarkable. It's classified as a horror novel, but because there's some horror elements to it, but it's a love story, and it's it's like you have this thing that's called a horror novel, but it's about family. And this author, Victor LaValle, a number of his books, I don't know a single writer that writes about family, whether it's sibling relationships or parents' relationships with children. Nobody writes like family like this guy does. And yet, if you go to a bookstore, you're probably going to find the book in the horror section, which is fine. It can sit perfectly comfortable. A little bit unfair, maybe, but Well, I mean, I don't think he chooses to write what he writes about, and oftentimes his books will have these horror elements, but it's not when you think of horror, you think of like Psycho and all this stuff, but this book is just there's a bunch of different sections of the bookstore you could put I have to read it, I think.
I mean, there's something else. I mean, sometimes when you read and you just laugh out loud, you can't control yourself. You're just laughing, and people are reading. I'm just reading something, because then if something witty and funny, you're like, holy shit, you can't control it.
Yeah, and it's amazing that it's just words on a page that are eliciting that
you're like response. Imagination. And okay, 2 more questions. Has any book you ever published been turned into a film?
Yep.
And how different was it from the book?
Yeah. The 11th book I published, it was a beautiful Brooklyn novel, South Brooklyn novel, very working class book called Heart of the Old Country, about a kid living in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, which is a sort of like white ethnic enclave. And he starts going to college in Manhattan, where he meets these more sort of upper middle class people. And it's sort of about the culture clash within his own life between sort of organized crime-ish neighborhood he came from versus the buttoned up, very well educated Manhattan college. And that was turned into a movie, but unfortunately they changed the title to The Narrows. And it starred an actor named Vincent D'Onofrio, who's an actor of some fame. It was quite good. It was a good adaptation. But, it's like they're always different, because books have so much more in them than you can fit into a 90-minute feature film. But it was a fair enough representation. Right. The book, it wasn't as good as the book. But, but it was perfect.
Good enough.
Good enough. And there's been others. I also got to reissue the book Born on the 4th of July, which was an Oscar-winning,
Oliver
Stone movie, and that author Ron Kovic, who was a very patriotic American, went to the Vietnam War, did 2 tours of duty, and I'm about to publish his diaries, and it's incredible to read them because he's so patriotic, so religious. I'm here, you know, God has my back, and we're fighting against these godless Vietnamese people. And in the war, he gets injured and then ends up being paralyzed from the chest down, and ends up becoming one of America's foremost anti-war advocates. So I didn't, you know, that didn't become a film after I published it, but it is interesting to publish a book like that.
All right. So the final question is the book always better than the movie?
That's a good question.
I don't know the answer.
I think it's almost always, the book is almost always better than the movie. However, actually, I'm sure there's many examples of the movie being better than the book, because oftentimes it's the movie that, like, no one even knows there's a book. And then there's a movie, and then it draws the attention. And that doesn't mean that the movie is better than the book, but, you know, a lot of one's favorite movies started off as a novel.
I remember reading Stanley Kubrick's 2010, like the novel, and the novel explains what happens at the end, where like the whole psych-out ending, and in the novel it says what happens. I'm like, oh yeah, I get it now. But in the movie, that's not the case. And for me, when I was I read Lord of the Rings when I was 9, and I loved that. And when that came as a movie, I'm like, I was quite nervous because I read that book, you know, a couple of times in my life. I'm like, you know, it's not the greatest book on earth, but it meant a lot to me when I was a kid.
Sure.
And I did love the movies. I thought they made it really justice. I'm like, oh, this is kind of how I envisioned it. Because a lot of times you read something and then you see the movie, I'm like, is that what he's looking like? You know, like, because you have all these, your inner idea of what people look like, or, you know, how they behave and how they act. Then you see the movie, like, that's not what I thought. But that's a case where I was like, that's actually pretty spot on. In my imagination.
You know, it's really, a lot of authors, it can be really heartbreaking for them when their movie, it's exciting, you know, their book gets turned into a film, and then they're heartbroken when they see the film. And I remember I was talking to an author. I've had many authors where the rights to the book get optioned for film. So someone gives them, you know, $5,000 or $10,000 to, like, potentially make a film. And then 9 times out of 10, there is no film, but they still make a little bit of extra money. And I remember I was talking to an author, and he was saying to me, he could tell that this company that wanted to buy the rights to his book, they were going to change some basic facts about the book. They were going to change it from being set in the 1980s to being, like, contemporary. And he was really agonizing over it. And he said, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, you can do one of 2 things. You can either just say, fuck it, you know, take the money, hope for the best, or you can keep agonizing about it, you know, and lose a lot of sleep and have your hair turn gray, and then take the money.
Fair enough.
Of course, there are people in life who don't always take the money.
That is, of course, true. As a musician, we know plenty of those. I want you to, I understand out of the 400 books you published, it's a lot of books, you can't pick the 3 best ones, but I want you to do a list of 5 books on your publishing company that people should check out. Okay. Not now. You don't. We can do it, and we can do it like afterwards. So you don't have to. I won't put you on the spot. And I also want you to.
I would love to do that.
Yes. So 5 books that people should check out, and then your 3 favorite books, and then people can check that out.
3 favorite books.
Yeah. But you can say that if you have 3 favorite books now, you can say.
You mean regardless of
anything? Your best 3 favorite books in the world.
Yeah.
You don't have to. If you don't know them now, we'll just have a list at the end with 5 Akashic books that people should check out.
Great.
And then 3 books that's like your favorite books.
Excellent. Yeah. I'm not going to do it on the spot. I know I could get 2 of the 3, but I'll need to think about it a little bit. But thank you for that.
Yeah. And thank you for being a part of my YouTube channel, Dennis Deep Cuts.
It's an honor.
Yeah. Awesome. And then see you guys. Stay wild. Bye-bye.
Bye.